Hello friends, I am back with a follow-up Posca illustration video, and in case you haven't seen it yet already, I do recommend checking out my previous video on Posca markers if you want a bunch of advice and tips on how I personally like to use them. So for those of you who have already seen that video already, you might know that I had mentioned trying out these paint markers on gessoed paper, which is what I decided to finally try out in today's video, and I'm going to be kind of talking about how I feel about this method. And so to begin, I am using the Arteza watercolor sketchbook, which I still have rarely used because, to be honest, I'm not really the biggest fan of the paper. And so that actually ended up making it the perfect candidate for this experiment, since I don't really know what else to use this sketchbook for other than, just kind of experimenting and not feeling bad if whatever I make isn't great. And by the way, all of the art supplies that I use in today's videos will be listed in the description as usual. So before I began the sketching portion, I had covered both pages with clear gesso, and after that had dried, I used a fine-grained sandpaper to lightly sand the surface because otherwise I felt like the gesso on its own was really textured. And even after sanding it lightly, there was still a little bit of a light texture, which I actually found made the colored pencil smudge quite a lot, which I was surprised by, since if you've been with my channel for any amount of time, you know that I pretty much exclusively sketch with these Cool Erase color pencils, and it doesn't normally smudge that much, but I guess just the way that the paper's surface is with the gesso, it smudged a lot. But honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal, since I could just clean up the sketch with my kneadable eraser, and also the Posca markers are very opaque, so in the end it didn't really matter if there was, a messy sketch, since it'll be covered up mostly with the markers anyways. So typically when I've worked with Posca markers in the past, I tend to use smooth marker paper or mixed media papers, but the issue that you can run into with using any kind of paper, even when it is smooth, is that the surface can pill or rip if you aren't super careful. And so for this reason, I decided to see what it would be like to prime the paper first. And lo and behold, it actually did help prevent the surface from pilling. The paper remained totally unchanged and there was no damage to the surface whatsoever. However, the downside is that because the gesso paper had a little bit of grit to it still, I found that it was actually wearing down my marker's nibs a little bit, which is definitely not ideal. So alas, we've got pros and we've got cons. Perhaps if I did multiple layers of gesso and did more thorough sanding of the surface, basically, a similar prep that I do for like my wood panels to get it super smooth, that might have been maybe given me the best results possible. But honestly, at that point, it just sounds like too much work for something that's meant to be just like a casual series of illustrations in my sketchbook. So overall, I find that paint markers definitely perform the best on non-porous smooth surfaces, but since I generally prefer to work on paper, I think that a heavy Bristol paper is likely to be the best fit without me having to prime and sand the paper beforehand, which is something that I had mentioned in the previous video, but I figured it might be a good experiment for both me and for you guys in case you guys wanted to know what that experience would be like. And then the next thing I wanted to chat about is I get a lot of questions, surprisingly, about how I choose my colors with Posca markers. So first and foremost, with paint markers, you are limited to the colors that you have on hand, which in some ways makes the color selection easier since you only have so many to choose from. And so I find that also using a limited color palette is part of the visual appeal when using paint markers, and I think that Posca in particular has a really nice color selection, especially for someone like me who really loves bold, bright colors. As mentioned in the previous video, I purchased my Posca markers individually, which allowed me to curate my color selection. I find that oftentimes when you buy sets of art supplies, the color selection sometimes feels a bit generic, like, you know, red, green, blue, yellow, black, brown, white. And obviously, depending on your budget and your preferred color palette and how many you want to get, that might be what you want, because sometimes buying a set is a little bit cheaper. But yeah, for me, I prefer to just slowly build up my color selection with colors that I know for sure that I'm going to want to use. And recently I have seen Posca release a more pastel colored selection set, which probably would be the one that I would go for if I didn't already own a bunch of singles. So anyways, when it comes to picking the color palettes for this sketchbook spread, I knew that I wanted one side to be more blue dominated and then the other to be more burgundy dominated. Basically, one side the girls would have, you know, a blue school uniform, and then the other side the girls would have a burgundy school uniform. And then to try and have the two pages feel somewhat cohesive, I did use the same pink, coral, and yellow colors throughout both pages. And I felt like that kind of helps keep them feeling more harmonious, but still having some differentiation from each other. Also, I got a surprising amount of questions about the blue line art in my previous Posca illustration video. I thought it was obvious, but I guess I will clarify here. The tiny blue marker used for the line art is also a Posca paint marker. It's just in the finest nib size. And it's actually the same nib size that I use pretty much in all of my videos when I add like little white highlights for my watercolor and gouache illustrations as well. Another tip that I don't think I mentioned in the previous video was that when I fill in areas, I typically like to outline the entire shape and then fill it in with straight parallel strokes. If the section is fairly large, I usually end up breaking it into sections. I don't think this really makes that much of a difference, but I feel like it makes it more organized of a process. And then when it comes to more intricate areas like the face, where you don't want to cover up your sketch entirely, I try to fill in around the sketch lines. And then that way, when I go to do the line art, I can still see it. And that way I know where, you know, certain features have been placed, like the nose and the lips. And this does unfortunately end up being a little bit wonky here and there because the nib sizes, you know, are fixed sizes. And so areas that are kind of more detailed or smaller, like the face here that you can see in the video, there does end up being kind of an inaccuracy from what your sketch looked like and what the final version is going to be. But again, I try not to be too much of a perfectionist when it comes to my Posca illustrations, since generally I just kind of do them as more of a fun, casual thing as opposed to them being high pressure masterpieces. Another thing that was frequently commented on in the previous video was that the Posca markers were expensive, which, yes, I do agree that they are not cheap, unless you live in Japan. But if you don't have the budget for the Posca markers specifically, they are an acrylic paint marker, and Posca is just the brand. So while the quality of these markers and the color selection is really nice, I'm sure that you could find alternative acrylic paint marker brands if you wanted to try out the medium, but wanted to get something a little bit cheaper. So I admittedly don't have a ton of experience with other brands. A long time ago, I used to have a couple Sharpies that were acrylic paint markers, which definitely are much cheaper, but the color selection was super limited. And then I also have a couple from the brand Liquitex, but that brand of paint markers, they only come in 2 sizes, and both sizes are chiseled nibs, which really doesn't suit the way that I illustrate. And I think the price point is probably about the same. And then lastly, about a month ago, I splurged and purchased a bunch of Molotow paint markers, which I think might be slightly cheaper or potentially the same price as Posca. I don't remember. But in any case, the color selection that I got is much more muted. And the fun thing about the ones that I bought was that they are actually dual-ended. So there's actually 2 nib sizes within one marker. And another bonus with the Molotow paint markers is that they are refillable and you can buy replacement nibs for them too, which I really, really like, because then that way when the paint runs out or you wear down the nib, you can just replace it as opposed to buying an entirely new marker. So for those of you who are on my Patreon page, hello patrons, I would imagine that you guys have already seen my first attempts and thoughts on the Molotow paint markers from a post that I made a while back. I admit I haven't gotten the chance to use them too much since then, but the one exception is that I did use both the Molotow and the Posca markers for some fun witch portrait illustrations where I used them together. And by the way, I made stickers out of them, and I finally made stickers out of the previous Posca illustrations from the other video as well. So I think they look really, really cute. They're like a really satisfying feeling matte vinyl, and I'll have the link to my shop in the description if you are interested in picking any of them up. But yeah, let me know if you guys would be interested in a video of me reviewing or demonstrating the Molotow paint markers, or maybe a comparison video of the 2 different brands next to each other. I mean, generally they're quite similar so far in my experience, but it might be a fun video if you guys are curious. So if you've been with my channel for a little bit, you'll probably already know that I love illustrating Japanese schoolgirl gang bosses, but I guess I've been especially in a Japanese motif mood since I've been consuming a fair amount of anime and manga lately. I feel like being in quarantine has really brought me back to my high school roots, where I spent all of my days by myself in my room creating artwork and watching anime/reading manga. You know, sometimes some things never change and you are who you are at your core. But yeah, specifically, I have been watching the anime Haikyuu and reading the My Hero Academia manga, which I have enjoying both of them quite a lot. I actually resisted watching Haikyuu for a while because I've never really been a sports person in general, and I never watched sports-centric animes either. And I kind of assumed that Haikyuu was going to be a fan service type show, so I just kind of wrote it off. But then I saw my art friend, Enerjax, aka Jackie. She made a bunch of fan art for the series, which kind of piqued my interest. And then it also kept popping up on my Netflix recommendations. So I finally gave in. I was like, all right, I'll watch a couple episodes. And I admit it did take me a little while to really get into it. At first, I just couldn't take it seriously because I kept thinking to myself, like, why are these kids being so dramatic about middle school and high school volleyball? But once they started to introduce more characters, I quickly became very, very invested in the series and totally, got swept away in the melodramatic elements of all the sports and stuff. I think particularly the episode when they introduced Nishinoya was when I finally became hooked. I mean, it's really hard to pick a favorite character from the series because they're all seriously so fun and endearing, and all of their kind of dynamics with each other are really interesting. But I think if I really had to narrow it down, I really do think that Nishinoya is a big favorite of mine, and also Karu. I find Nishinoya is just like, he's so spunky, it's very infectious, and Karu, I like his kind of mischievous, chill vibe. Very fun. And also, of course, the dynamic between Hinata and Kageyama is one of my favorite things ever. I high-key ship it. And yeah, this is what happens when you have no social life and you just become incredibly invested in fictional characters. I mean, I was already doing that before quarantine, but now in quarantine, I think it's incredibly heightened because I cannot have any kind of life of my own. And so you just like live vicariously through fictional stories. And then speaking of, with My Hero Academia, I, of course, am a big fan of the anime, but the new season won't be out for a while. So I began reading the manga, and I might be a little bit obsessed. I initially kind of picked it up from where the 4th season left off, and then I kind of flew through it, and then I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just start from the beginning. So I've been reading a lot of it. And currently I am up to date with the manga. I won't say any spoilers, but oh my god, things are getting so intense. I honestly have no idea where the series is going to go when this arc is over. It's just like reached some serious high levels of drama. And also, now having consumed both the anime and the manga, I gotta say the animation team did a really, really good job at translating the manga style. I feel like it's nearly spot on. They did such a good job with it. I mean, and of course the manga style in general, I think really does lend itself to animation in general, but in any case, they did a really, really good job. And weirdly, I really enjoy the way that the hands are drawn in the manga. I've been kind of like taking mental notes whenever I'm reading it. They're like really, really well drawn. And I think that Bakugo is still probably my absolute favorite character from the series. But now that I'm all caught up with the manga, I also think I really, really love Aizawa and Shinso. Oh, and Sue and Marco. You know, I'm a Libra. I can't just pick one. I'm very indecisive. But yeah, if any of you guys are fans of either of these series, do let me know your favorite characters in the comments below. I honestly love chatting fandoms with you guys, especially since, quarantine. I'm sure we could all use just some fun, good old fandom chats. And yeah, that pretty much brings us to the end of this illustration process. I really actually like how this spread turned out despite kind of the slight hiccups, but overall I think it turned out really cute, and I think moving forward I'll probably just keep using Bristol and smooth mixed media paper. And before we go, big shout out to Nystique Arts, who sent me this adorable and beautiful, sweet surprise care package. I was so surprised to receive this in my P.O. box, and everything is right up my alley. I love the super colorful pastel, kind of mythical, celestial vibes of all the pieces. So thank you so much for sending this to me. The note was really sweet, and I love the detailing and all the packaging. I'll have their socials linked in the description if you want to check them out. Hello, friend. Thank you for sticking around to the very end of the video. I have a bonus clip here for you. So, for those of you who don't know, my absolute favorite month of the year is just around the corner, aka October, aka Halloween month. And so to celebrate my favorite time of the year, I thought that it would be really fun to create some kind of Halloween-inspired fan art every week for the month of October. And as an added bonus, I thought it would be fun to play kind of a guessing game with you guys. So basically what I have in mind is that every week at the end of the video, I'm going to give you guys some kind of hint or clue as to who this character is going to be. It could be from a movie, a TV show, some kind of pop culture series. And basically you guys let me know in the comments who you think this character is going to be. And so to kick off the first week of my Halloween fan art month, the character I have chosen has magical powers and a furry companion. maybe this seems really obvious, but when you really think about it, there's actually quite a few characters who fit this characteristic. So let me know in the comments who you think this character is going to be, and let me know your favorite Halloween movies. I feel like I've already compiled a bunch of movies that I plan to watch this coming month, but I'd love to hear what your favorites are. And yeah, I hope you guys are as excited for this kind of Halloween series as I am, and I hope that you are having an amazing day or evening wherever you're at. Thank you so much for watching this video and supporting my channel, and I will see you next week. Bye!